Welcome back, everybody, to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink. Indiana, 2 straight wins after a 5-game losing streak, and to help us make sense of what we've watched over the last couple of games and look forward to the final stretch run of the season, Tony Adragna of the Back Home Network and the Assembly Call community is where you can find his film room work. Tony, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me on, Alex. I'm excited to talk IU hoops, and I'm excited to be your guest after a couple wins. That's nice.
Yeah, you get the luxury. It's been a rough couple weeks on the show here, trying to find positive things to talk about. So now we do have a couple of positives to talk about with the 2 wins over Maryland and Minnesota. I want to start with the Maryland game just for a second. Obviously, Indiana has had their backs up against the wall the last couple of games. Had to get that win first before they could even look ahead to the Minnesota game. But from the Maryland game specifically, I'm just curious, high level thoughts, what you saw from the Hoosiers in that game. Anything stand out? Obviously, Xavier Johnson played really well, but anything else beyond that really stood out in your eyes?
Yeah, obviously, like you mentioned, Xavier having that game was super important, super beneficial. But I liked the flow that IU played with offensively. I thought that it was a welcome sight to kind of see Xavier Johnson pushing the ball, pushing the pace. IU looking to get things out of their secondary transition break. That was exciting to me to see. The offense has been so stagnant, and when your offense is stagnant and you're struggling to score, one of the easiest things you can do is, try to get the ball out in transition and score before the defense is set. And even if it's in a secondary break, it doesn't necessarily have to be a fast break transition layup or something like that. And I thought IU did a good job of that. There's a couple times where Xavier pushed the ball down the floor and would just get like a trail ball screen from Trace Jackson Davis and create. And those are the type of actions that I love to see. You don't have to set up a set that the other team already has scouted. Like, you're just letting your players go make plays. And that was encouraging to me to see in the Maryland game.
When you look at Indiana's offense this season, I think one of the questions I get the most is what exactly they're trying to do on a game-to-game basis. And a lot of people have questions about what exactly what you just said, how stagnant things have been. Have you been surprised at all just at kind of how the offense has evolved over the course of the season? And what do you see in terms of schematics and theme of what they're trying to do that has changed over the course of the season? And what do you think maybe are some efficiencies that are going to need to be made in future seasons to get things maybe in a better spot? Because right now, Indiana, I think, first in the Big Ten in points per possession allowed in Big Ten play, which is obviously really good. 11th in points per possession offensively, which not as good. I think holding them back a little bit in some of these close games down the stretch.
Yeah, to touch on the offensive and defensive efficiency points first, it was kind of funny to me because I remember when Tom Crean was the coach, I was like, man, I just would love to watch IU play defense. Like, I wish they would just have a great defense. And then now we're in the midst of, they've got a great defense and a subpar offense. And I'm like, I would kill to just watch IU play some good offense. It's like completely flipped on its head, which it turns out people want to see their offense and defense play well. Just breaking news. But yeah, in terms of offense and kind of the themes that I've seen, I mean, it's no secret they want to play inside out. Their 2 most efficient scorers are back to the basket players essentially in Trace and Ray. So, it's no secret. Everybody knows it. Mike Woodson will tell you that's how we want to play, or how I'm quoting him when I say how we want to play, not pretending I'm on the team. But and so it's hard when you want to play inside out, and a lot of times your guys on the outside aren't able to make shots, aren't even able to create off of long closeouts. Like, I think Trace Jackson Davis has done a tremendous job of not forcing the issue against double teams and things like that. I think he's done a nice job of kicking out. I found it interesting that IU's offense seems to be worse when teams will just kind of play him straight up and kind of dare him to beat them rather than doubling and then allowing him to kick out. I think IU does a nice job of finding good shots out of their post actions. I think shot quality is one of the tools that's out there. And in numerous games that IU's lost, they have projected IU to win based on the quality of shots that they got. Now, obviously, analytics are great. They add some context and some nuance to things, but at the end of the day, you got to make those shots. And schematically, I think it's been a little concerning in terms of the spacing and lack of movement a lot of times that we see, especially down the stretch of games. But it's also like there's no magic pill to not make the defense collapse when you're not able to hit outside shots. And we've seen the last couple of games when IU's been able to make shots from the outside, just seems like things open up so much more. But also in the last two games, it's not like IU's gotten different actions to get these looks. Like they're the same stuff they've been running. Guys just happen to knock them down, and the game gets a lot easier when shots start going in. So there's a little concern on my end just from mainly the spacing. I thought the spacing would be a bit better this season, but at the same time, I do think IU's gotten some good looks out of stuff that they haven't been able to finish historically this season, and in the last couple of games, we've seen them knock those down.
It's the most wonderful time of the year for college basketball fans, and our friends at Homefield have the world's most comfortable, premium licensed collegiate apparel to get you ready for all of the madness. Run by IU grads in Indianapolis, Homefield produces the most unique apparel designs available for fans of your favorite school. Over 120 different schools are available at Homefield, and more are being added each month. Our current favorites at Podcast on the Brink are the Never Daunted Crimson t-shirt with the IU Oval logo and the vintage Bison mascot hoodie. It's the most comfortable IU hoodie available anywhere. Podcast on the Brink listeners can save 15% off of your first purchase by using code BRINK15 during checkout at homefieldapparel.com. That's code BRINK15 for 15% off of your first purchase at homefieldapparel.com. Do you think the lack of usage for guys like Miller Kopp and Parker Stewart is more of a function of those guys being one-dimensional and unable to really create anything for themselves, or do you think there's something lacking offensively with Indiana not running enough sets to put them in position to where they can do things? Because it's obviously they're both shooting a pretty good percentage, and you talk through it and you say, well, it'd be a good idea for them to get those guys more shots, but when they actually get them the ball sometimes in a position to score, it seems like they're very limited in terms of being able to get a shot off or really create something off the dribble. I mean, Kopp's a little bit better, but yesterday's game against Minnesota, I can recall two times. I know one was in transition. Parker Stewart came down, kind of drove left and threw up a wild shot that was missed badly, and then another time he drove baseline and got up in the air and didn't really have anywhere to go. So it seems like those guys, there's opportunities maybe to use them a little bit differently, but I'm just curious kind of how you reconcile their low usage and against them being maybe a little bit too one-dimensional to get them more shots.
Yeah, so I was kind of looking at, because I've even been of the belief, like, how does IU get these guys more shots? And then so I actually went back and watched every 3-point attempt that Miller Kopp took at Northwestern his sophomore and junior year, just to see, like, was Chris Collins just able to unlock something in Kopp that Mike Woodson's not, in terms of sets he was running, ways he was getting him open. And essentially what I found is that Kopp was more of a scoring option out of their ball screen stuff, meaning that, the ball handler coming off the screens was looking for Kopp a little bit more than maybe a Xavier Johnson would be when he's coming off ball screens, just based on Kopp, being more of a scoring threat for them. But I maybe saw Collins run one or two sets out of every 3-point attempt his sophomore and junior year for Kopp. Everything else came off of kickouts, or, ball screen actions where the defense helped off and he kind of lifted up and they were able to go out to him. So to me, it is a function of, some limited skill sets, and, it's really hard to get guys shots, because when you look off of, when they're coming off of screens, I think last time I looked, Miller Kopp is in like the 20th percentile in the country in shooting off of a screen. So, when you see him coming off these double down screens or double pin down screens, like you think that's a great look. Miller Kopp's a good shooter. He's getting open looks, but really he doesn't score effectively that way. And neither does Parker Stewart. They're both very, very effective spot up shooters. Well, you can't really run a lot of sets to get spot up guys actions. And that's kind of what I've found. I do eventually want to go back and watch Parker Stewart, maybe when he was at Pittsburgh, to see how they ran stuff. When he was at UT Martin, it was just such a different game, playing against different guys, and his usage was so high because he was head and shoulders above everybody else he played. But I did want to get and look at that with Kopp, just based on he's played this, similar teams in the Big Ten. And I found that he was pretty much used the exact same way at Northwestern, maybe more of a scoring option that guys were looking for, but getting the ball in similar ways that he is with IU this season.
So Indiana holds on yesterday. I guess that's the best way to put it, against Minnesota yesterday. It looked like, I started writing, I publish something right at the buzzer every game, or I try to. I call it at the buzzer, but it's usually within 5 minutes after the game ending. And I had it pretty much done when it was a 27-point lead. And here we go. We can just ease into the, add the stats in when the buzzer sounds, and this is ready to go. And of course, I had to add something in there about Minnesota closing the gap to within 3 in the last 10 seconds. It's kind of one of those games that you look back on, and after the final buzzer sounds, it doesn't necessarily feel like a win because of how they played down the stretch. I mean, it goes as a win, but I don't know how much momentum you can take from something like that. What did you see there in the last 8 to 10 minutes? I mean, Minnesota made some ridiculous shots. I mean, give them credit. Peyton Willis is one of those guys that can just get going crazy, and he doesn't need any space, and he just starts hitting things. But it seemed to me like Indiana felt like the game was over and just started going through the motions. I'm not sure if it was on Assembly Call's post-game show last night. I heard somewhere where somebody was talking about like the prevent defense in football, right? Where you kind of just go through the motions and you feel like the game's, in hand, and you don't want to give anything up crazy. That kind of felt like how Indiana was playing down the stretch, rather than to continue stepping on Minnesota's throat. They just kind of went through the motions the rest of the way.
Yeah, it was, I thought I was going to have to delete my Twitter account for a while, because I tweeted with like 8 minutes left that I needed a stress-free game to watch. And like right as I tweeted that, obviously things kind of went south for IU. And of course, people were looking for anything to blame at that point. So I got some of the brunt of that. So I was grateful that IU pulled it out, so I didn't have to delete my Twitter account. But no, in all seriousness, it kind of, I remember a point in the game where Rob Finney took a bad three with right in that 8-minute mark range, and they came back from commercial break and showed Woodson talking to him about shot selection, and it was kind of like all downhill from there. And there was bad shots on the offensively. There's bad shots. There were turnovers, and just things seemed to get real tight. And we've kind of seen that from IU down the stretch in numerous games in the Big Ten season. And so they weren't playing with that free flow. They weren't pushing the ball anymore in transition or in their secondary transition with Xavier Johnson and getting early actions. Like, to me, you have to figure out a way to strike a balance between, yes, you've got a 27-point lead, and, you don't need to be shooting the first shot you shoot. But to me, or the first shot you shoot, the first shot, open shot that you get, you don't need to shoot. But there's also a balance where, you're not playing not to lose at that point instead of to win. And IU certainly didn't find that balance last night. Now, defensively, I didn't really see a ton wrong with how they guarded down the stretch. I mean, Minnesota, and hats off to them. Like, I remember the first time they played at Assembly Hall, I was like, holy crap, these dudes make some tough shots. Like, that seems to be their calling card, that they make tough shots. And Willis is really good at times. And I mean, they struck lightning in a bottle offensively, where it's going to be hard to contain any team that strikes, at that rate from the outside. I think there was a stretch of possessions of like 15 to 20 possessions down the stretch where they scored over 2 points per possession. Like, that's insane numbers. And And to be honest, like I said, I didn't really see a ton IU was doing wrong or differently on the defensive end down the stretch. Fortunately for IU, if there was one more minute in that game, I think IU maybe falls. And fortunately, it was 40 minutes and not a 41-minute game. And like you said, ultimately, it's a win. It goes in the win column. And there's a couple ways you can look at that as a coach is like, all right, if you win by 27, you do gain some momentum, but you might not have a lot of teachable moments. And IU ended up with some teachable moments yesterday. Now, obviously, as a coach, you want it to be more comfortable than it was. And so I don't think that Mike Woodson's excited that IU blew that lead and only won by 5. But there certainly became some more teachable moments out of that game that I don't think any of us thought kind of were coming.
I don't often post a ton of opinion on Twitter, but during that run last night, I think I tweeted something to the effect of, how do you not call a timeout during this run? What was your opinion of just Woodson letting them play through it? I think he maybe did. There was a couple of breaks. I think, I'm not exactly sure if they were media timeouts or if he called the timeout. I know there was one was like 70-48. I think it was like 22 points. But then after that, it just seemed like a snowball that was rolling downhill, and it seemed like there was an opportunity there, at least at some point, to call a timeout. And it was interesting. I don't usually read the replies on Twitter because I've found it not to be all that useful, but on that one I did, and there was kind of a mixed reaction. I think some people felt like it was the right thing for him to let them play through it. That's how they learn. He's trying to teach them how to win. And there was other people that kind of agreed with me that maybe it would have been best to at least kind of stop whatever momentum and get a break and maybe reset things. Where do you come down on that whole debate? And do you think there was a couple spots in there where Indiana should have maybe stopped and tried to change some things?
Yeah, I found it interesting that he kind of let them play through it, based on, over the course of the season, he's continued to say, I got to get the guys over the hump. It's on me to get them over the hump. Like, to me, that's an excellent moment to call timeout and try to get them over that hump. Now, I get the argument and I get what he's saying, that like, I want them to play through it and figure it out themselves. But I mean, at some point, I think you just have to cut it off and stop the bleeding and being like, all right, they can't play through this. Like, we got to figure it out. We got to reset. Got to get their confidence back. Got to get the crowd out of it a little bit and kind of stifle some of that energy and that momentum. Maybe talk through, hey, Willis is hitting these shots. Maybe switch up a ball screen coverage or how you're guarding him. Like, I certainly would have called one myself, and I'm not trying to say I'm smarter than Mike Woodson or anything of that sort. I'm just saying, personally, if I was coaching that game, I would have called one. I'm a firm believer in stopping momentum and being able to just get your guys to reset and kind of shift the mindset, or even if it's just hey guys, we're all right, they're making tough shots, like something. I think you got to try something different, and it's been my biggest gripe in terms of Woodson. It's not a big one, but I think his timeout usage is still kind of NBA-esque. Like, there'll be like a 50 seconds left in the half on a dead ball, and he'll just burn a timeout, and now they're down to their second time. They only have 2 timeouts left the rest of the game. I still think he's trying to learn this NCAA. You got 5 timeouts. If you can save 3 of them for the final 3 minutes, you're probably going to burn them all in a close game. And so, like I said, it's not a big gripe in the grand scheme of things. I tweeted this not too long ago, but it is something that his timeout usage does seem a little bit kind of haphazard in how he uses them, and there's not like a strategic reason. It's just like, I think I'm going to draw something up here with 50 seconds left, like timeout off a dead ball. And then when he did that against Ohio State, it was kind of frustrated me because then Ohio State just came out in zone. So whatever he drew up, and during that timeout, they weren't even able to run anyway. So it was kind of just like a lost cause timeout. But again, it's not a huge gripe. It's not a big referendum on Mike Woodson by me saying that. It just has been one of my concerns of him kind of transitioning to this college game is how he's used timeouts.
He's also spoken a lot about teaching guys to win. Like, that's been a theme that it brings up. How much do you buy into that whole argument that these guys need to be taught how to win? He's brought up that some of these guys haven't been a part of winning in college, but going back to like high school and AAU, I'm sure these guys were part of successful teams, and won a lot of games. Otherwise, they wouldn't be playing at this level. But do you think there's anything to the fact that Indiana has kind of mixed together a bunch of guys that haven't had success at the college level? And does that become problematic when you get into a place where you're in a tight game against a team with experience like Wisconsin that has won a lot of games? Do you think that really is a legitimate thing where this team does need to be taught how to win?
To me, it's more of an individual personality type that's really hard to change. Like I think that in terms of IU, like I think Xavier Johnson is very much an alpha, but he can be a little bit erratic in how he plays. So it's hard to like rely on him to. And I think he's done a great job recently of being kind of a go-to guy for IU. But to me, it's more of like an individual personality type of somebody just kind of being like a dog, if you will, or just a very, very like tough-minded. Like they're gonna go get you a bucket. They're gonna win this game for you. And I don't really know if it's like a collection of like learning how to win, because like what does that ultimately, like what does that really mean? Does that mean you have the confidence that you can go knock down a free throw? Does that mean you have the confidence you're gonna knock down a shot? Does that mean you're gonna execute down the stretch because of your mindset's clear and you're able, like it's such a subjective term that I would love to like dig deeper into, like what do you really mean by teach them how to win? Because then at the end of the day, like probably the best team they've played all season in Purdue, they outplay them down the stretch and they beat them. And so like, did they learn how to win and forgot? Type of scenario. So to me, it's kind of it's coach speak. I'm sure there's deeper levels to it that he's really trying to say. But I don't really buy a ton of stock in it. Like I think confidence is important in your abilities to close down the stretch, but I don't think it's like a learned trait that you didn't have in December, but you learn it in February.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. Don't want to dig too much deeper into the woods of the Minnesota win, so I want to look ahead a little bit to Wednesday's game against Rutgers. Looking at Ken Palm right now, and Rutgers is 76 in Ken Palm. They've got to be the best 76th ranked team in the history of Ken Palm with the teams that they've beaten and kind of where they stand. Indiana's a 5-point favorite according to Ken Palm, 70% chance of a win, which seems to me like much more like a 50-50 game when you consider how well Rutgers has played recently. I know they have a couple of losses, but Rutgers also beat Indiana 3 times last season, so they're well versed in how to frustrate Indiana and have success against them. Just kind of, what are your initial thoughts when you look at this matchup? What is good about it for Indiana? Obviously, it's at home, and what is maybe concerning when you look at these two teams on paper?
Yeah, I agree with you in terms of Rutgers. Like, if I would almost be curious, like, what Ken Palm would have them rated if they didn't lose those 3 games in the beginning of the year against what was like DePaul, UMass, and Lafayette, where they would be rated at, which obviously, like, if ifs and buts were Katie nuts every day to be Christmas. So I don't want to get too much in the if game, but I do think that, they would be much higher rated, and they're kind of an outlier there in Ken Palm. In terms of the matchup, Ron Harper intrigues me in terms of he's kind of their 4-man at Rutgers, but he plays more like a 3. And so is it a Race Thompson matchup? I'm imagining, and is it going to be, that he's going to be pulled away from the rim a little bit, and he's going to have to guard off the dribble, which is a bit concerning. He's capable laterally, but at the same time, it's not a matchup that I don't think he thrives when he has to do that. And so that's a little intriguing. I think, Geo Baker, Mulcahy, those guys, they know how to play. They've beaten Indiana numerous times. They've gotten the better end of Indiana numerous times. And that's a bit concerning that there are a lot of guys back from that team that took IU to the woodshed a few different times last year is back. In terms of what I like about the matchup is that, Indiana they're hungry right now. They're playing pretty well offensively. Rutgers is, I think, defensively they're pretty solid. I think they're fourth in the Big Ten in terms of defensive efficiency, and so that scares me a little bit. That with IU struggles they've had, over the course of the season, not the last couple of games, offensively, that Rutgers can kind of take them out of their game, and when it becomes kind of a rock fight in the 50s, in each possession is so important. I think I would take Rutgers' experience over IU's if it does kind of turn into that kind of possession game down the stretch, and obviously we've seen IU's kind of falter down the stretch as well. So I'm with you. I think it's a 50-50 game. I think it's great that it's at Assembly Hall. IU does have that advantage. I'd imagine that Wednesday night will be a great crowd at Assembly Hall, but I never feel good with these Rutgers games, with just the recent history of them, which and they're fighting for their life too. This could very well be a win and you're in type of game for both teams in terms of tournament, and so that's a good thing and a bad thing. I guess it's good. Indiana's got their backs against the wall, but Rutgers does just as well, and they're coming off of a 3-game losing streak. And so they're hungry for a win as well. Like it's kind of eerie, almost, like the position that both these teams are in. They're very, very similar spots. And, that's why I kind of have it as a toss up myself.
Yeah. Indiana's, at least going into this past weekend, they were behind Rutgers, I think, in a lot of the bracketologies. But when you look at the resumes, obviously Rutgers has those 3 really bad non-conference losses, but they have a ton of really good wins, whereas Indiana has no really quote-unquote bad losses in terms of the quadrants, but they don't have as many. I think they have 3 quad 1 wins when you look at Notre Dame on a neutral court, Purdue and Ohio State at home. What resume would you rather have at this point, Indiana's or Rutgers? Because I think it's going to be real interesting with not just Indiana and Rutgers, but also Michigan when it comes down to picking the field, because it's almost a guarantee that Rutgers and Michigan are going to have more total losses than Indiana, but they're both going to have better wins overall. I think, Michigan has one of the toughest non-conference strength of schedules in the country. So they could hypothetically, I think, still have a chance to make the tournament even with 14 or 15 losses. But, who out of those 3 teams, I guess, do you feel most comfortable with saying is going to make the tournament?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, if I'm comparing IU and Rutgers, I think I would feel better about having the IU resume. Like I just start getting worried when you've got, 10, 11, 12 losses anyway. And then when you've got 3 of them against really, really bad teams, and I know they were at the beginning of the season, but, I don't know how heavily that weighs, but those are 3 really bad losses. I think one of them was Lafayette was almost in the 200s, perhaps.
Lafayette's 317 in Ken Palm. UMass is 204. DePaul was on the road as 106. They also lost at Minnesota. They're 104th in Ken Palm, and they lost at Penn State, which Indiana also lost at Penn State. I mean, it kind of becomes, I mean, their wins are obviously really great. I mean, Purdue, Michigan, Iowa, Michigan State, Ohio State, and Illinois. I mean, that's pretty good. But then the flip side, obviously, is what you mentioned, just the fact that they lost to a team ranked 317th in Ken Palm.
Yeah, that's I think I would rather have Indiana's resume because, like you said, you don't have any bad losses, and you've got some good wins. I mean, the Purdue win is obviously very big. Ohio State, Notre Dame, and yeah, you haven't really lost anybody that you shouldn't have. I think their worst loss is the one at Penn State, which is still a quad 2 loss, right? And so, I personally, I would prefer IU's resume over Rutgers, but I don't know I know they've changed how they do it over the course of the selection committee, but don't they weigh like the later games heavier, or they say they do, or I don't really know how
I don't think they're supposed to do that, but we don't ever really know the whole lack of
Right.
transparency. I'd love to see like a weekly bracket. Think of how much more interesting and how many more people would be engaged with the college basketball season if the last, say, 6 weeks of the season they released a bracket every week, once a week. These guys are, it doesn't have to be set in stone. It doesn't even have to be like, you don't have to give us locations. You don't have to give us like who is playing, which site or any or what region they're in or any of that stuff. Just give us the
Right.
teams that as of today are in from an at-large perspective. And maybe, obviously you have to figure out things in terms of the who's winning the smaller conferences and all that, but at least give us an idea. I think it would be so great for the sport if we had something to follow down the stretch. I mean, no other sport I mean, the NBA, right? You know which teams are making the playoffs. NFL, you know which teams are making the playoffs. That's what makes the games even more exciting. But to give us this, top 4 seed reveal on CBS on an afternoon, and then like not tell, like, how about then just tell us the last 4 teams in to give us an idea of who's in, right? No, so teams know where they stand. I think that's like a huge opportunity missed for college basketball.
I agree. I would love that. I mean, everybody else is doing it. Like you've got a million bracketologists that are trying to figure it out. So like there's obviously a market for it. People want to see it. I would love it just from the standpoint of I don't have to hear about like Jerry Palm's bracket, or something of that sort. Like I can just,
we know Jerry Palm's bracket's never going to have Indiana in, so correct. they could be a trending towards a 2 seed, and he'd have them first 4 out. So
exactly, or like I think I don't remember who tweeted out yesterday, but like all of the people on these networks, they treat their network personalities bracket or bracketology like it's gospel, and like Indiana is not in right now, or Indiana is like, and it's just somebody's opinion, but they don't treat it like that. And so that's kind of annoying to me, but I would love, give me the bracket once a week. I would be all in. Like, you look at like as a Colts fan this season, their last couple of games, like we knew what they were playing for. Now I don't know if they knew what they were playing for the way they finished down the stretch, but I love that. I love that it makes the regular season games more meaningful. And not that this Rutgers game isn't meaningful. I think IU knows that what's at stake here. But imagine if it was like we knew these are the last 2 teams in, and like whoever wins this is probably going to punch their ticket. Like that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, it'd be a lot of fun to follow if we had at least a better idea, because at the end of the day, it is the opinion of those people in the room, and you're at the mercy of what they decide. But at least to have an idea of like on a particular year what a committee is going to be looking for would be nice. Looking at a couple other notes with Rutgers, turnover percentage. I think that's an opportunity potentially for Indiana taking care of the ball. Rutgers turns it over a lot, but they also force a lot of turnovers. So if Indiana can, win that battle, I think it's a huge plus. And also finding a way to get to the free throw line. I think that's another thing that Rutgers is. It's crazy to me, as physical as they play, they're 4th in the Big Ten in opponent free throw rate, and they don't get to the line a lot themselves, but they're not really hurt by it because they don't give up a lot of trips to the line either. Looking at them from a stylistic perspective too, their point distribution, they do rely on a lot of 2s. I mean, 3-point percentage, they're 36.4, which is 4th in the Big Ten, but they're only getting, I think, 28.8% of their points from 3 in Big Ten play, which is 11th. So you look at the percentage and it may scare you a little bit, but they don't really take a ton of 3s. So I think Indiana being at home, if they can get to the line at a reasonable rate and connect on some of those, I think that's a huge opportunity. And also winning the turnover battle looks like something that could be important. Absolutely. And I think, you mentioned Rutgers in terms of their style of play. Obviously they play slow, but something to keep an eye on is that, their opponent's average possession length is the longest in the Big Ten at over 19 seconds of possession. So, I've mentioned it kind of turning into a dogfight in a possession battle down the stretch. I think if IU can figure out a way to speed up the tempo a little bit and make Rutgers uncomfortable and not just kind of settle into their defense, I think it is a big key for them. It's also a game where you don't want to be behind. I think they're definitely a team you don't want to fall behind by 8 or 10 points because, as you mentioned, the pace and just how they play, it can be really frustrating to try to have to grind back into the game against them. That I think they kind of thrive off of making their opponents frustrated. So I think that's another big key for Indiana. Big picture, just this first season for Mike Woodson. I picked Indiana to finish eighth in the Big Ten. I had a lot of people tell me that was way too low in the preseason. It looked like it was going to be too low there for a large stretch of the season when Indiana started out. So while I think at one point they were 16-5 overall, and then they kind of hit that skid in February. What have just been your thoughts on the performance overall in the first season? Better than you thought? Just about where you thought it would be? Maybe worse? I'm just kind of curious where you come down on that.
Yeah, I mean it's right about where I thought they'd be. I did pick them to make the tournament, but I picked them I think at 10-10 in the Big Ten, which they have an opportunity at. And I think so far, I obviously had them winning the Penn State Northwestern games, but had losses against Purdue and Ohio State perhaps. I think I've had their record to date. I think I had it nailed, which is just pure luck because obviously different games happen different ways. But they're right about where I thought they'd be. I mean, I knew that they were going to struggle. Mike Woodson told us, the offense was going to be behind the defense. They've outperformed my expectations on the defensive end. I think it's been, I think an integral part of that has been Trace Jackson Davis's ability to be able to kind of leave his man and protect the rim at a much higher rate than they did in previous seasons. I think that's kind of helped anchor their defense down. I think it's been kind of interesting how good their defense has been when we talk about two of their starters really have defensive liabilities in terms of Miller Kopp and Parker Stewart. And so that's been really impressive to me that he's been able to kind of build this defensive system that has performed well throughout the season. Offensively, I thought it would be a bit of a struggle. I was hoping to see Trace Jackson Davis step out a bit more and stretch the floor. I thought that was going to be a big part of kind of the offense and him being able to knock down like a 15 to 18 footer and just create better spacing. Obviously, that hasn't happened. I think he shot 2 threes. One of them was a late clock situation and hasn't really stepped out even to the mid range too much. So that's something I was hoping to see a little bit more. And I think that would have kind of played into more of the open style that we kind of heard Woodson was wanting to employ. But overall, I mean, I think if IU makes a tournament, I think it's a successful season in terms of his first season. Not to say if they don't make it, everything is down the drain, but I think you really do build a lot of momentum for the program if you can make the tournament in your first year. Just out on the recruiting trail, all of the things that go into building a good basketball program. I think if you don't make the tournament, I'm not saying that you can't turn things around and build momentum, but I think it kind of sets you a year back from where you want to be. Obviously TBD on that, but personally, I do think they end up making the tournament. I think it's going to be a close one down the stretch, obviously against Rutgers, and maybe they have to win a game or something in the Big Ten tournament, which obviously that historically has been poor for them. But I do think they ultimately make it, and if that's the case, I think it's a successful first season for Mike Woodson. I think it's been good to see the recruiting that he's been able to do and bring some guys into the program that more so fit kind of the type of players that he wants. Obviously, he has a type, he wants long, athletic guys that can play multiple positions. He's been able to go out and get that thus far. And so it'll be interesting to see how things kind of play out with the transfer portal. This season, it's going to be interesting to see how he dives into that. Again, obviously last year he dove into it a little bit and kind of see how this IU roster shakes out for next season, because they're obviously right now they're oversigned by 1 or 2 for next season. So there's going to be some attrition one way or another, whether that be guys going pro or guys transferring elsewhere or guys just deciding to hang them up. Some of the guys that have that extra COVID year. So I'm excited. I'm excited about where the program can be, just as a fan. And I think that it'll be really interesting to see this last couple weeks of the season, what he can do. This is kind of where you make your money a little bit in terms of being the head coach and running the program. This is where, previous regimes faltered a bit. And so, if Mike Woodson can finish this stretch strong, maybe make it to the semifinals of the Big Ten tournament and create some sort of run in the NCAA tournament, I think it changes a lot of people's opinions pretty quickly on if that, was this the right hire or was it not or whatever. I think that's exciting as a program if you can see somebody do that, since you've seen other regimes struggle to kind of, like, as we've heard all season, get them over the hump. So we'll see. Or they could, they could lose their next 3 games and not make the tournament. And I can only imagine what the fan base will be like should that happen. So it's exciting times heading into March, but it's a little nerve-wracking as a fan too, I think.
One question I get constantly, and then we'll get you out of here on this. Trace Jackson Davis, his future. You follow the NBA pretty closely. I read a lot of your Pacers tweets. You follow the league, and you've seen a lot of the great players have come through the state of Indiana, high school players, and you've been around the game. What do you think there's a market for him in the NBA for next season, or do you think it's one of those things where if he wants to go pro and take a shot at it, he's going to have to earn his way through the G League or having to go overseas?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, he certainly doesn't fit the mold of a 6'8" NBA player, 6'9" NBA player, simply because he doesn't have an outside shot, and he struggles to move laterally, where he's got to keep guys in front of him. You're thinking about the type of guys that he would be guarding on a night-to-night basis. Even the backup 4s in the league, we're talking 6'9" to 6'11", can stretch the floor and can take a guy off the dribble. So, that's like every area that Trace really struggles, but unfortunately for him. Now, on the flip side of things, I'll say that if a team wants to take a flyer on him, they know that he's very athletic. He can move, he can catch lobs. He knows where to be on the floor. He seems to have good quick twitch jumping. So he hits the floor and he can get right back up, which is important. And he has pretty decent mechanics on his shot to where, you watch him shoot his free throws and stuff. It's a little disheartening to me as a lefty that a fellow lefty doesn't have the purest stroke in the gym. But I think his mechanics are okay to where you could see that translating to be able to develop an outside shot. And maybe they just think, somebody hasn't worked with them properly, or they see something like, oh, we know we can get this to translate. So I don't think he's a complete, no way. But I do think it would have to be somebody that really wants to take a chance. And yeah, so I do think it's going to have to be a grind for him. I don't think it's just something where somebody's like, yep, this is who we want our future backup 4 to be in our team. So I do think it's going to be a grinded out process for him, but I don't think it's impossible.
Tony, it's always good to catch up. Enjoy your tweets. I enjoy the work that you're doing with the Back Home Network as well. Thanks for the time this week.
Absolutely. Appreciate you having me on, Alex.
We'll be back again, possibly later this week, with another episode of Podcast on the Brink. If not, we'll talk to you again next week. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a rating or a review over on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink. Thanks, everybody, for listening.